Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages. Buenas noches, damas y caballeros, chicos y chicas, edades, y bienvenidos. Welcome to the Karey Carbaugh podcast. My name is Karey Carbaugh, and hence the podcast, and this is episode number 9, Living with Low Vision. Can you believe that we are on the 9th episode already? Hard to believe. This is our last single-digit episode. We will be into double digits next week. And I just want to thank each one of you that has watched one of these or multiples of these, either live or on the replay. I want to thank you for your support. I never thought I would be a podcaster or a Facebook Liver, whatever we are here. But here we are. And it's because of your support and your encouragement that I'm continuing to do these. So thank you. Tonight we're going to jump into my third episode or podcast in my series of 4, Dealing with Low Vision. And tonight we're going to talk more about living with low vision on a daily basis. I don't want this to be a negative podcast. I'm going to be sharing some things that are challenges, things that I deal with on a daily basis. But please don't think of this as a negative thing. I try to keep a positive outlook on things. And some things I'm going to share tonight I don't have a great solution for, but they're just challenges that I've learned to live with. Last week I shared that my parents' philosophy while I was growing up was that I would have to deal with or compete with sighted, at that point, children the rest of my life, and I might as well start in kindergarten. My philosophy is similar to that. I've always lived life in a way that I've always seen it as God dealt me a hand, and I could choose to either play that hand or fold it. And I've chosen to play the hand that I was dealt and not sit back in a closet or in a room and waste away. That's the philosophy I've always lived by. And you'll see that as I go through some of what I do in my current day-to-day life. Before I get into that, I want to back up a little bit. I neglected last week to share some of my extracurricular activities. I talked a little bit about school, but growing up, I was very involved in church activities. I was a youth deacon in the Presbyterian Church. Later, as an adult, became an elder in the Presbyterian Church. So church has always been a big part of my life. Music has always been a big part of my life. I was involved in school choirs. I've sung in church choirs since I was about 6 years old. I played clarinet and bass clarinet in band and orchestra in high school. And I still continue to sing today. In fact, I'm singing in a community choir locally. And we've been invited, our choir has been invited to premiere a piece at Carnegie Hall in New York City next month. So I'll share a little bit more about that as we get closer. If you'd like information, if you'd like to come hear us in person, and if you're someone I don't know one-on-one, if you'd like to meet me in person, I will be in New York City on March 16th performing. Let me know either in the comments or direct message me, and we can connect and I can show you how to get tickets to that. That's not the main purpose of tonight. I just wanted to share that in saying that I am involved in extracurricular activities. Who am I? Who is Karey Carbaugh? Well, I'm a programmer. I've been a programmer. I was a programmer for 17 years for a Fortune 500 company, actually a Fortune 100 company. I won't mention their name because I was actually laid off from that company. There was some evidence that there may have been some discrimination involved. I explored that possibility. I talked a little bit about bullying last week. I'd like to say that only goes on in school, but unfortunately, that's something I've dealt with my entire life. Discrimination. Uh, I guess you could say bullying. It's not quite as much bullying once you become an adult because kids aren't physically beating up on you, but emotionally. I've had supervisors at work that have been great. I've had supervisors at work that have not been so great. I currently work for a community college. I had a supervisor at the community college that I had difficulties with. And I'll go into some of why that may occur in the workplace. I can understand it. I don't necessarily agree with it, but I can understand it. And I'll go into that a little bit later. But so I am a programmer. I'm a technical guy. I'm a techie by nature. But I'm also a people person. My degree is actually in child and adolescent psychology and sociology. I always thought I was going to work with children and adolescents. That's still a passion of mine. I've been a youth leader in church most of my adult life. I'm currently teaching Sunday school for 3rd to 5th graders at another church, not at the Presbyterian church, because that church that I grew up in actually doesn't have any children or youth currently. So I've started attending another church where I teach Sunday school. So that's a big part of who I am as an adult. I've learned ways around being able to read the lesson. A lot of it's memorization in advance, being very familiar with the material, similar to these podcasts, thinking through it in advance, and being familiar with what I'm going to present, and preparing maybe a little bit more than someone without a vision disability might have to prepare. One of the questions that I was asked by a good friend of mine, Dr. Darrell, after my last podcast, he said I should share, I forget exactly how he worded it, but this is a question I get asked a lot, and that is, how have my other senses either been improved or been more developed because of my vision limitations? And that's an interesting question. I'm not sure that it's one that I have a great answer for because I've had low vision my entire life, and I should make that clear. Unlike many people who may be suffering from vision loss later in life, this is something I've dealt with my entire life. So I've learned ways to deal with it that have been that way my entire life. It's not something I've had to learn to deal with recently. But to his question, I think my hearing is maybe a little bit more acute. It's not that I necessarily have better hearing, but I've tuned into it a little bit more. My sense of smell, perhaps to some degree. There's some other senses that are just kind of like a sixth sense of feeling what's around you. I don't even quite know how to put it into words. I think everybody has it. Maybe you've experienced it. If you have, maybe drop it in the comments if you've ever experienced just kind of a knowledge of what's around you, an awareness. I used to have kids in school growing up that would come up or as a youth leader, I've had kids as a youth leader, as an adult, come up and they'll put their hands over my eyes and guess who this is? If it's someone I know fairly well, I can almost always guess who it is because of the sound of their voice, the timbre of their voice. So even if they try to change their voice, there's certain qualities in the human voice that don't change even when you disguise your voice. So I think maybe I've tuned into that a little bit more. Memorization, although as I get older, it becomes a little bit more difficult. I must admit, I'm not quite as quick at it. But I've had to learn. I'm not a computer programmer at the community college, but I work with data a lot and have to navigate around computer screens in an enlarged fashion. If you've seen one of the recent short videos that I posted, I demonstrated how I use both spoken speech and enlarged text to navigate around a computer screen. This means I have to memorize the screen and what's on the screen. It's part of why I haven't tried to interact with live comments here, because I would have to memorize where those are on the screen and also would have to get up fairly close to read them, even in an enlarged fashion, which would, as you've seen in some of my earlier videos before I became a bit more familiar with at least how to go live, you may have noticed seeing the top of my forehead because I was leaning down to read the screen. And if I were to try to read comments live, that's where I would be, is looking down at the screen, and you would be looking at the top of my head. And so that's why I haven't tried to read the comments live, but I've tried to respond to them after the podcast. Which brings up a good point. If you're watching this live, if you could drop a live in the comments. If you're watching this on the replay, let me know that by putting a replay or an R in the comments, live, or an L for watching it live. And as always, if you think of questions as I'm going through some of this, please do drop those in the comments and I'll try to respond to them. Or direct message me if it's something that's a little bit more personal or private. I'm happy to respond to those in a more private fashion. And if you'd like more details on some of the videos that I've shared, let me know that as well. But I wanted to share a little bit that I am a tech geek to an extent, and that's how I've been able to figure out and share some of the techniques that I use to navigate the computer screen in the last couple of short videos that I've done. But let's take a look at some of the challenges faced by anyone with a vision disability. I think one of the biggest challenges that I hear from a lot of people who are low vision, who have low vision or are blind, and that is transportation. Transportation is a huge challenge for all of us. I'm very encouraged and very hopeful that in the near future we'll have self-driving vehicles. Hopefully those will be something that, if we can afford it, we can purchase and have access to them just like someone else would have access to a car. But if you think of it, and I've been thinking about how to present this and how to explain this tonight. But transportation, I rely a lot on public transportation, either buses. We have a new service that's an on-demand service here locally that only goes around town, but it's an improvement. But all of those have their limitations. If you think of buses, they may be very inexpensive and affordable, but it takes me, on average, about 45 minutes to get to work every day and about 45 minutes to come home. Fortunately, one of the positives that's come out of COVID is that I don't have to go to work every day. I only have to go to work 2 or sometimes 3 days a week. So that's been a help. But on the days that I do have to go to work, it's about a 45-minute commute each direction, and by car it would be about a 12-minute commute. And a lot of that 45 minutes is waiting for the bus. So if you think about your car, what would it be like if you put the keys in the car and then had to wait 5 to 10 minutes before the car would turn on? And then once the car turns on, you have to stop every 3 or 4 blocks for anywhere from 30 seconds to a minute, in addition to the stoplights and other traffic delays. If your car had to pull over to the side of the road and wait for 30 seconds to a minute every, let's say, 3 or 4 blocks on your way to work or to run errands. This is basically the way the bus is. So I have friends who say, well, it must be great to be able to just hop on the bus and go anywhere you want. Well, yeah, it is, but there's a cost. And while the buses may not cost a lot in terms of financial cost, right now our local buses are free, there's a cost in terms of time. Not only is it 45 minutes to go to work every day and back from work every day, but the buses don't run after about 7 p.m. So once I get home from work, I'm home. I can't run errands in the evening. I can't go out to dinner unless it's someplace I can walk to. And, let's think about walking someplace to dinner. That means probably 15-20 minutes just to get someplace for dinner or to run a short errand. 15 or 20 minutes each direction. There's no 5 or 10 minute errand running like many people, if they need to go run to 7-Eleven or run to the store to pick something up real quick. That's a 5 or 10 minute thing. That does not exist in my world or in the world of a person with a vision disability. 5 or 10 minute errand, not a thing. Unless they have a spouse or significant other that they can rely on to take them somewhere. But now you're relying on someone else. So you're not fully independent. So one might say, well, there's Uber and Lyft. Then you don't have to stop and wait every couple blocks. That's true. But you still have to wait for about 15-20 minutes for those to show up. So again, think about putting your keys in the car and having to wait 10 or 15 minutes before the engine turns on. And now let's add to that. I know a lot of people are frustrated and concerned with gasoline prices. For me, if I'm going to use an Uber or Lyft, that's going to be a $5 to $10 minimum ride. So what if you had to put $5 to $10 in your gas tank every trip you made? Not just every time your gas runs low, but every trip you made, you had to put $5 or $10 in the gas tank. And if you want to take a longer trip, let's say, like for me, going to Denver or going to see family that live out of town, that's about a $95 trip each way. So you're looking at $180, $190 plus a 15 to 20 minute wait minimum each direction. So imagine if you were faced with putting $180 in the car worth of gas just to go make a longer trip, either to see family or to go someplace out of town. And yes, other people have other expenses with a car besides gas, but if you think of $180, let's say you make one of those trips a week, and just for quick math, let's say $150 4 times a month. That's $600 a month in transportation costs. The other thing that people with low vision face is that most of us have jobs that pay less. I'm fortunate in that I have some skills that I can get a little higher paying jobs than most, but most visually impaired people are faced with jobs that pay less than the average income. In fact, I've seen statistics that range anywhere from 60% to 93% of people with low vision are unemployed. Most of those live on Social Security disability, which is way less than standard living wages. And I think the reason that those numbers vary a little bit is because some people are not looking for work, and so they're not counted as unemployed. So I think that's where the 60% number as opposed to the 93% number comes in. But that's another thing that visually impaired people face, is unemployment. And a lot of that is due to discrimination. Basically, anything that I do takes me longer. If you followed one of the videos that I posted on how I can read the computer screen, it's slower. The example where I read the enlarged computer screen or the enlarged Facebook message, you could tell that I was reading that screen much slower than a person who doesn't have a vision disability would read it. So everything I do in life pretty much takes longer. And yet I'm only given the same 24 hours in a day that anyone else is given. So back to my earlier point, from an employer standpoint, I can understand why they might not hire a person with a vision disability, because it takes them longer to get the job done. And so the challenge is to find employers who are willing to allow for that. And it used to be, when I first started out as a programmer, there was an expectation of, let's say, so many lines of code be written a week, so many lines of computer programming code per week in a 40-hour work week. Well, I was able to put in 60 or 70, maybe 80 hours a week in order to get that same amount of code written that was expected in a 40-hour work week. Well, as the expectations became higher and higher, and the company began expecting everyone to work 60 to 80 hours a week and produce that much more, now suddenly that 60 hours a week worth of work expected became 120, or let's say 90 to 120 hours per week. And if the expectation raised up to 80 hours a week worth of productivity, now we're talking 150 to 160 hours that I would have to put in to get that same level of work produced. And so that's just a reality that I've had to deal with my entire life. I'm not complaining. Once again, I don't want this to be a negative podcast. Just pointing out some realities that everything takes longer. If I have to walk everywhere I go, it takes longer to walk somewhere than it does to drive. And so the reality is it just takes longer. I mean, there are a few things, it takes me about the same amount of time to eat as it does someone else. Although another difficulty, and I actually hadn't thought of this in a while, but I had a conversation with a friend of mine who's recently lost her vision, an elderly person, and we were talking about some of these things that I've shared on the podcast. And one of my videos, I think it was the one on how to read street signs using my phone and zooming in on my phone, was actually shared with this woman. And she asked me a few questions. One of the questions she asked me was, how do I deal with buffets, food that's a buffet style menu? That's a challenge. Quite honestly, that is a challenge, because while I can see enough to see basically what the food item is, sometimes the labels are big enough for me to read, sometimes not, or they may be placed in the center of the food dish, so they're far enough away that I can't read them. So generally I try to go through a buffet line with someone and have them describe what's there. Fortunately, I don't have too many food allergies and very few foods that I really dislike, so I can kind of fumble my way through and fill my plate up with something that I can at least eat and not be too miserable. But many people with a vision disability have a lot of food allergies. And so that becomes a challenge if they can't read the labels on food in a buffet or on food that they're purchasing in the store. And they can't always read all the fine print of what's in the food item. So those are some challenges. Just shopping can be a challenge because I can only read things when I get up really close to them and have large enough print, either a large enough label that I can read, or I use my phone to zoom in like I showed on the street sign. So shopping becomes a challenge. And I really only have Saturdays to shop. Because, as I mentioned earlier, buses quit running at 7 p.m. My day begins at about, well, after I get ready for work. My work day, when I have to commute into work, starts at about 8 a.m. in order to start work by 9 a.m. And I finish work generally around 6 p.m., get home by around 7 p.m. So 8 a.m. to 7 p.m. is pretty much my work day. And then no buses after that, so I can't run any errands in the evening. On weekends, there's no buses on Sundays, so I can run errands that I can walk to on Sundays, but basically Saturdays, or Lyft and Uber, and paying that extra cost for Lyft and Uber to run errands on Sunday, or going with someone. And I do occasionally run errands with friends, but that becomes a challenge, and it takes most of the day on Saturday to run a few simple errands. I've started doing some things online, but not all online shopping sites are fully accessible, as I was demonstrating with some of the techniques that I used for reading Facebook posts. The same type of thing would apply to a website. So not all websites for online shopping are made fully accessible. If that's something you'd be interested in more information about, drop me a comment or shoot me a direct message, and I would be happy to go into more detail on how to make websites more accessible for people with vision and other disabilities too. People don't think of color blindness, that can actually, it's not so much that they can't see the color, but a lot of times those colors blend into each other. And so certain backgrounds with certain colors of lettering on them are very hard, not only for a person with low vision to read, but also for someone who's colorblind. They may just blend in together. So those are a few of the challenges that I've faced as an adult. I could go on and could go into more. I don't want to make this a super long podcast, but I did want to share a little bit of what my daily life looks like. And that pretty much sums it up, I think. As I say, I'm very involved in church activities, so Bible studies are a huge part of who I am and what I do. That's a big part of my story as well. Not just a vision disability. I've chosen to focus on that part of my story for the last couple weeks. We'll have one more episode on traveling as a person with a vision disability. That's what I'm going to go into next week. A lot of that will tag on to some of the challenges that I've discussed this week, but I'll go into some more details on that next week. So if you have any questions, like I say, put them in the comments, either if you're watching this live or on the replay, or direct message me. If there's things you'd like me to go into more detail on after this series, let me know, because I'm still open and developing this as we go. So I'm very interested in knowing what you're interested in. I don't want this to just be about me babbling on about whatever. I really do want this to be engaging. I want this to be something that is of interest to my followers here. If you've gotten value from tonight's podcast, let me know that by putting a value or a V in the comments. Once again, if you're watching it live, drop an L. If you're watching it on a replay, drop an R. And let me know what in particular has been of interest and what you'd like more details about. But for now, I think this pretty much concludes tonight's episode. Once again, I do sincerely appreciate the support and the time that you've spent watching this and getting to know the subject a bit better. Thank you so much, and make it a great week. Do something positive for someone else. And until next time, or until I drop a short little video, make it a great day, make it a great week, and we'll talk soon. Goodbye for now.